Hi, it's Hailey. We're back for another episode of Therapy Talks. We have Joelle Maletis joining us today to talk about how different modalities are best suited for different clients. And as a clinician, we're doing an art of therapy to determine how to best support clients. We also do a bit of a deep dive of how we can best use some specific entities from EMDR to support clients. So, Joelle, I would love to get to know you a bit in the ways that you are involved in the field of psychology and mental health. I would love to hear about what you practice and everything, even just whatever you're willing to share.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Haley. I'm excited.
Thanks for having me.
It's exciting. I know we've been trying to get this scheduled for a while. Um, yeah, I started off, my background actually is a dancer. I did that professionally and then, long story short, went back to school. And so I have a background in education and fine arts dance. And I wanted to look at like somatic processing, right, and dance movement therapy, and that's really what I was interested in. And then when I got to school, that changed significantly, and I became really interested in trauma and PTSD and eating disorders. And again, I'm a ballerina, so we can draw the dots, right? And I always joke and say only people go to psych school to heal themselves, but that I think was very much my journey, and that shapes still how I do therapy. So much of it is this holistic in the sense of how the mind and the body and our spirit and our emotion, what we do in life, how all of that comes together, and then what does that look like in the wake of trauma. And so some of it is based on my own experience, and what worked for me in my own journey, and that was a lot of skills work, and a little bit of EMDR and somatic experiencing, but really more classic talk therapy. And so I take that, and that's become the baseline of this East meets West with dialectical behavior, DBT, and then using that with things like EMDR or solution focused therapy, narrative therapy, to really build a very unique model for each client. And so that's how I got there. It's
Mhm. Yeah, so your own personal experiences being a ballerina and then connecting, like you said, all of those different approaches to best meet a client's needs. And I love when clinicians always say we're eclectic. We use so many different things. And I think that's so important because not one client is going to fit a modality perfectly. And so we're always changing in the ways that we use things. So I would love to you just focus on EMDR today in the ways that you use like somatic processing with EMDR. I'm really curious about that.
Sure. So EMDR it's a very specific therapy modality, and there's multiple levels of training, and so different clinicians have different levels of training. My area of focus with EMDR is trauma specific, and then also working with military and first responders, and immigrants. So working with populations that have had high levels of trauma and repetitive trauma. And so that's where my training with EMDR lies. I typically use it though in connection with other types of therapies. And so for me, I'm teaching all different kinds of techniques and tools that I've borrowed from EMDR and put them into other components of doing therapy. So with trauma, I always want to meet the client where they're at. And so some clients come in and they've done a lot of therapy work, or they've stalled out in their therapy work, and they're coming in and they're like, this is what I want to do, and I don't, I want you to push me as hard as you can, and I'm, willing to just drop right into it and do all of this really intense therapy work. And they tend to fit that traditional EMDR model. For me personally, I think more naturally than other clients. And this is just my own style. It's not the way to do it, right? There's lots of ways to implement therapy technique. And then I think other clients come in and they have never done therapy, right? And so it's scary in a lot of different ways. And so the the beautiful thing I love about EMDR is I can take some quick skills like resourcing or tapping, creating a positive index experience for them that is more of that 40,000 foot level, and start working with skills development and slowly bring them to a place where doing more traditional EMDR models would work for them, right? But I tend to go slow, and I want clients to have skills and not a positive experience in therapy, but a safe experience in therapy, if that makes sense.
Definitely. You're using some of the wonderful preparatory things before really full on reprocessing within EMDR to utilize those things to best support clients. So I'll just kind of break that down for those listening. It would be, for example, I always make the analogy that our minds are like brains and we can reprocess information. So if we were like a computer, then if we were to reprocess, it would be to like rewind and replay the incident or experience in a more helpful way. And then versus like installation is giving someone the ability to have wonderful beliefs around themselves. And that's what we mean by the resourcing. So do you have maybe an example of like a resourcing exercise or like client example that maybe you could give?
Yeah, and that's a great explanation. I often explain it like a movie too, between a computer and a movie. And so with trauma, we get stuck in the movie, and what we remember is how we feel about what we've experienced in the movie. So every time we re-experience that movie, we have deeper feelings, and we're remembering feelings upon feelings, and so they just stack kind of like Legos, right? One on top of the other. And so we get stuck in that trauma in the way that we think about it. So with this idea of reprocessing, for me, it's usually working with two different theories. So one is more traditional CBT and looking at core beliefs, that cognitive behavioral therapy of what's that core belief? If this is true, what does that say about me? And true in the eyes of the beholder, right? With what their perception is. So, if for example, if I fail at school, then I will be unlovable, right? And if I'm unlovable, I'll never be in a relationship. I'll never succeed in life. My parents will be disappointed, right? So that kind of thinking, and I'm just making something up, but that kind of these what we call core beliefs. And so part of it is we work on, okay, what's that core belief, and then finding the evidence. Again, that's more of the solution focused model of, okay, is that true? Prove to me, like put that on trial. Okay, let's say you're unlovable, right? Give me all the evidence of why that's true. And most people will grind against that, and they'll be able to start to rationally see that maybe that core belief isn't entirely true. And so that's some of that beginning work. And so I build this model in session very quickly where we identify the core belief, we put that on trial, and then that reprocessing of what's a positive memory. If we went back to that movie, or if we could, create an environment or an experience, right, where you were successful and you were lovable, what would that look like? And sometimes we're building that from scratch, and sometimes the client will say, well, there was this one time I did this thing which made me feel so proud of myself. I'm like, okay, there's that resourcing index with EMDR. We come back to that positive resource. It's like, okay, stick with that now. Go with it. What does that feel like for you emotionally? And then EMDR is nonverbal, typically, right? We don't use a lot of talking with it. So, okay, let's sit with that with some bilateral stimulation very quickly. Let's sit with that, hold that for a second. Then now tell me how you feel. And people typically will report that they feel lighter, not necessarily better, but there's this somatic experience of, I feel like I can breathe a little bit. And I'm like, okay, cool, hold that. Let's stay there. So come back to this movie scene. Remember how we recreated that. So every time, right, there's that negative core belief where you feel like I'm going to fail, I'm going to be unlovable, I'm I'm never going to have a relation. Every time we go back to that thinking, remember this time when that wasn't true, right? So can we put that, can we put that in? So that's an example of a way to do, one way to do resourcing, right? Of okay, now let's create this positive. And the reprocessing with EMDR is about this bilateral stimulation where we're really moving the eyes from right to left and creating this, this reprocessing of that experience or the memory of, okay, can we move that to somewhere different, right?
Hmm.
And so for me, I kind of build it in this like 3-step model where I'm pulling from a bunch different pieces,
Yeah.
so I can do that quickly in the early stages of therapy, right? This wouldn't necessarily be an advanced model, right? This is in the very beginning when people are first coming in. How can we get there quicker,
Hmm.
right? That isn't taking them through in an EMDR session in its entirety.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, what you're expressing a lot is the preparatory stages of phases like 1 and 2, right? And so a lot of resourcing happens in those stages so that when clients go to find the experiences that created that negative core belief. So, for example, I'm unlovable. Generally, there's an earlier experience that created that negative belief. And so with the resourcing, it allows the brain to be more adaptive when we're doing the full desensitization and reprocessing phases. So the client can move through them in a more equipped way. But I really love how you're acknowledging that clients do really want that sense of relief and movement forward. And so it sounds like they really benefit from that resourcing in the initial stages of therapy.
I think so, and I think that one of the responsible things as therapists that we do is we screen clients we go through a screening process or an assessment on who's a good candidate for EMDR, right? And there's lots of theory on that, and for me, I'm looking at skills development and a little bit more of a foundation for clients before we go through those stages of EMDR, right? So I may look at 1 or 2 and stages 1 or 2 like you're outlining and weave those in before I even get to doing EMDR traditionally, where we're going through the different stages and we're implementing these different protocols at each stage, right? And I'm looking for clients to develop a sense of basic skills and resiliency before I move into EMDR traditionally. And some of that is the clients that I see, and some of that is I am eclectic by nature. And so I'm looking to see what the client's going to tell me. And like I said, some clients come in and they're like, I've done all that work. I don't want to do skills. I want to do EMDR. And then we are going to do EMDR traditionally and how it's written, right? And that's appropriate for
Are
them.
you like highlighting the difference between like EMD and then EMDR? Like I know that there's the different titles and like each of those are just highlighting like the different stages that we're using.
That's a great question, and I'll be quite frank, I'm not 100% sure. So, sometimes it's, they're calling these flash techniques, right? And so I think there's a lot of different ways now that people are incorporating Francine Shapiro's original, this was the model. And so, when I learned it, it was, this was the model. I think now there are so many variations, and I think they work. The one thing about EMDR that I always highlight with my associates or the people that are training with me is there's an art to doing therapy, right? It's not just like, hey, I read this thing and I can do this thing. There's an art to doing therapy. And so in the beginning stages of learning EMDR, I think EMDR one of the things that's so brilliant about it is there's an art form to it. And so if I, as a therapist, and this happens often, I've been doing this a really long time, but I don't know everything. And I have my edges and my blind spots, and like every other human. And so I think there are times when I'm with a client and I'm thinking, I don't know if I have the skill, right? Or I'm not sure how comfortable I feel. And doing EMDR over Zoom, especially with COVID, has been a really interesting experience for me. And I've noticed that I tend to be more cautious. And I don't know if that's a control thing about me or if that's something about not really understanding how to use the model in a telehealth setting, or there's lots of reasons for it. So I find that there are some clients that I'm referring out, even though I have the training. I'm looking at what they're saying to me, saying I'm not sure if I can get them where they need to go. And I feel like that's also ethical therapy too, right? Of saying, I'm not sure if I'm able to take the client where they want to go with this particular model. So I think it's so complex, right?
Like you're highlighting a lot of different challenges that clients may have or clinicians may have when applying EMDR in different settings or with client specific needs or their own individual challenges. Like I can definitely relate. Like a lot of time I like to personally, I'm someone who aligns with like getting things done and helping clients moving forward, because I find when clients are doing well, it's very satisfying. So I find myself so often having to remind myself that phases 1 and 2, which is history taking in preparation for bilateral stimulation of the 8-phase protocol. Sometimes I find myself in those stages for a very long time with the client, and I'm very eager to move forward. But that's part of the 8-phase protocol from a very standardized Francine Shapiro's original recipe. And so I just try and be really patient with those clients and have them to be ready. And so I do agree with you, though, in a digital format, like for myself, I do offer EMDR online, but I'd have to make sure that those 2 phases are very solid for the client, that they're meeting the criteria to move forward into the desensitization and reprocessing phases. So I agree with you. Yeah, like definitely if there's a client that is very, very highly dissociative, that would be definitely outside of my scope of practice at this time, maybe one day in the future, or different things I'm just not familiar with, or there is occasionally clients who have a lack of stability in their life, and therefore we're doing a lot more management of their basic needs rather than being able to move into those reprocessing phases.
Yeah, and then also being able to pick and choose. I find clients who spend a lot of time in phases 1 or 2, and I appreciate that you said that, Hailey, because I find that I do that as well. I tend to keep them there. I don't know, longer if they need to be, but I want to move them along faster. And, I need to be very mindful that I give clients the time that they need to stay in those stages, but that I can do some of the flash techniques, or I think it was last year, right? Oprah Winfrey interviewed Prince Harry, and he's, demonstrating the butterfly technique, right? And so that's something that works great. It's very quick. It works very well, and I can do that while we're going through tell me something that's stressful, or while I'm doing the history taking, the assessment, that I can start to do some of these flash techniques to lower anxiety levels, right? Even in the report processing, the report taking, right, of the process. And so there's all sorts of things, I think, that with that kind of tapping, which is resourcing, that's later stages in the protocol, that I'll kind of pull in, even though we're in this stages 1 or 2. I'm able to say, okay, well, let me teach you this little trick, right? And let's incorporate that with some breath work and try it for a week. I typically see people once a week. It's like, give it a try. If it works, cool. If it doesn't work, no problem. We'll try something else. And I find that people will say that it was really helpful. And so instead of having them necessarily tap on their shoulders, because being in a meeting where you're doing this, my right? It might be a little distracting. It's like, well, I can do that on my thighs, right? Especially for kiddos at school, right? I can take two fingers and I can slowly, rhythmically tap on my knees back and forth under my desk, and nobody will see that I'm doing it. And I can incorporate that breath work, right? And start to center myself for things like you said, dissociation. That's a technique that I can pull from the EMDR to start working with that. Now, that's not necessarily reprocessing the trauma, right? But we're able to start somewhere. So for me, that's how I kind of pick and choose some of these things to begin clients moving into that processing or reprocessing trauma.
You're giving them tools for their toolbox depending on the challenges that they're
Totally.
facing.
Right.
Wonderful. For me, I find that I am really following the standardized protocol, because if I can really, as someone who is always going to be a lifelong learner from EMDR because of all the different things that can come up, I find that if I know that standardized protocol very intimately and deeply, then that's where I can become creative with it in ways that I know are going to be most effective. So I just find that right now I'm really deep diving into understanding like all of the nitty gritty pieces of it. And I find that's been really helpful, because I find within the original learning of EMDR, there was a lot that was missed in the basic training. Like you do this, and there was a lot of well, why do I do that, or how do I do that, or there was a lot of just learning but not really the applicable like follow up with how to apply it. So that's why I feel as though going through this consultation process of learning how to ask questions and bring cases and applying like an understanding of each of the phases and why, then it's been really great to like glue all those pieces together. And I've actually noticed where maybe I was going to make a mistake in the way that I applied EMDR. Not that you can ever, like a client would suffer dramatically awful from that. There's no really negative outcome from that, but it's more about getting the best case scenario. So for example, in EMDR, what we need to do, like you said, is we identify a negative core belief. And generally, we want to identify the negative core belief that's associated with an incident. So recently with a client, I found that there had an assault happen. So within that assault, we went through the assessment phase, which is phase 3 of EMDR, and they brought up their negative core belief. But that negative core belief that they had, or that negative belief that they held with associated with that experience, it was more related to after the incident. They were saying things like, I should have known better. I should have been more aware of what was going to happen, which was really interesting for me, because without the consultation process that I'm going through and my own learnings, I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to realize that that negative belief was not actually associated with the moment of assault. That was actually associated with the after effects of the assault, which is a whole different metaphorical route in the brain, right? A whole different line of chain of association. So thankfully, I was able to realize, like, okay, it sounds like you wish you would have known better and wish that incident and that assault would not have happened. But what was the negative belief that you hold from that moment of assault? And instead, what came up was, I'm not safe. I'm in danger. I can't control myself. Those negative beliefs came up instead. And so what was really interesting is that because of that, when we did the float back, we were able to find the different experiences that were related along those routes of associations. And a lot more memories were able to come up that were of an higher intensity, like the SUDs, the systematic units of distress. And so we were able to actually metaphorically find those roots of associations that really grew the intensity of that assault, and allowing that assault to fully be reprocessed in that piece. So I think that's really great that like from all the learning I'm doing and the understanding of it. And I feel like whenever I'm with a client in my mind, it's a bit of like an imagery exercise for myself, because I'm like, we're driving down a road or down a train track, and are we on the right track, going to the right destination? Are we seeing the things that we should be seeing or not? But I always appreciate when Francine Shapiro says, is the mind's going to go where it wants to go, right? And we're just kind of supporting the client along that journey.
Absolutely. And I so appreciate you highlighting that, because I think there, for me personally, and again, the way that I train clinicians is there is something to be said about understanding the model, the way the model was designed. And so that was really important to me, through my process of learning EMDR. And, I learned it in school, but then I went back and did some recertifications, and then have some specific recertifications to work with military, first responders, refugees, immigrants, in a very different way that are dealing with more complex trauma. So, I agree with you. Like understanding how the model works and getting the supervision and consultation around that. And that's where I say it's an art form, right? Where how do I ask the question, where I'm going to get the response that opens that door, so we can start to explore, is this it or is this it, right? And then just we kind of gently keep moving that. I almost think about it as a seesaw, right? We keep gently moving that deeper and deeper to see where those beliefs lie, right? And so often it's early childhood. And so much of the trick with EMDR is landing on not the only core belief, right? But the correct core belief for that particular memory or that particular trauma, right? And I've done it where I've gotten it wrong. And it's like, well, I thought this was what we were talking about, and we go through, these 8 different stages, and we get through the end and we're like, that was good. It worked. There was definitely some movement or some process there, but I don't know if that was the right one. So maybe we need to go back and there's more to do with it, right? Or it was more complicated than I thought, right? And so, like as a lifelong learner of this, regardless of how much I know, I feel like every time I go back and I take a class or I listen to something else, there's a new piece that I learn. And for me, that's really important.
Definitely, because I think that sometimes as clinicians we have that art form, and so we have to balance being the creativity and the art form of it, but still understanding why the phases are the way that they are, or even grammatically why some of the questions. So for example, when we are doing an assessment phase of an experience or a trauma, we would ask, so what are you feeling in your body now? And that now piece is, I know it's just one word. It'd be really easy to be like, what are you feeling in your body? Right. And inherently, we think it's obvious to ask, the client would understand now. But sometimes they're like, well, what would, you mean, what I was feeling then in that incident, or what I'm feeling up in my body currently right now. And that actually matters, because part of the reason why EMDR is so, one of the theories is why it's effective is we're having that one foot in the past, one foot in the present, but we're also understanding that EMDR is tackling not only the past, the present, and the future, and the way that those traumas affect our life. Because not only can we think about a trauma and go, that was not good, we can think about how we felt in that moment and not being good. We can also notice how we feel currently, how it feels not good, and how maybe it could trigger us in the future to also feel not good, or any variation of that.
Right. And exactly. And our defense mechanism is such where we're not going to feel it. If it's painful, right? Why would we? So our brain works, and our brain works in mysterious ways. It also makes logical sense when we break it down and we say, well, we wouldn't feel that emotionally. We wouldn't feel it in our body. We wouldn't re-experience it, right? We would shut it down, and it gets stuck, right? It gets stuck in our mind. It gets stuck in that analytical processing. It gets stuck between the conscious and the subconscious, right? Or the unconscious, and it gets stuck in our body. And so when we say, now, what we're asking somebody to do is actually tell me where in the body, and what are you experiencing in this moment right now, juxtaposed to what were you feeling, or where do you feel it in your body. Typically that's going to bring somebody backwards, right? They're going to go, well, when that was happening, or when I'm thinking about it, this is how I feel. And so part of this idea of reprocessing is that we're actually bringing it conscious, right? We're making that the client aware of their own process. So when I say we're making them aware, we're opening these doors and inviting clients to step through to create their own narrative, because now that's conscious, right? And when it's conscious, they can reintegrate. And so that's so much of the last phases of EMDR is this reintegration component, right? And so that now that one word becomes fundamentally important, right? And I've made that mistake of not at, like, again, when we're learning, we're like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that. Or I've asked, I typically will say, okay, stay with that, okay, go with that, right? So tell me, where are you feeling this now? Okay, go with that. And then we go back into this, right, bilateral stimulation piece. And I've made the mistake of saying, okay, stay there. Well, no, that's not the right word. Okay, well, let's, let our words, right? Let's try this again. So I think, yes, learning the technique, the way it's designed, there's a reason for that, right? And then getting to a place where based on what the client is presenting, here are some things that I can do now that will be effective for relief and stress management, maybe not effective yet to reprocess, right? So titrating between those two ideas of where are they right now in their process and what can I do as a therapist with them there, and then where are they at in experiencing trauma, which is so subconscious most of the time, right? And how do I help the client move to a place where they're safely re-experiencing to reprocess, right? To hold it differently.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, because a client could feel differently in the moment of trauma versus the moment of recalling the trauma in the present experience. And so those sensations may be the same, but they also may be very different. And so we have to guide the client on how to adequately reprocess or resource from that experience currently, because that's the experience that they're in.
Right. And then when you talk about, like you were suggesting earlier with dissociation, right? So much of the time clients will say when we're doing the interviewing piece or staying in that parts one and two, well, I don't feel it, right? Like I know I'm angry or I know I'm sad, but I don't physically feel it, that detachment, right? Or derealization, depersonalization, dissociation. These are all psychobabble words for basically feeling disconnected. Some people say I feel like I'm floating, or I'm having an out of body experience. Other people say I feel like I'm watching myself right from the corner, like a movie. Other people say I feel flat. So they're telling about something that they have called horrific. This was a horrific event or traumatic event for me, and they're recalling it. And then when we ask, tell me about how you feel about that, right? They say, I don't know, I feel numb. Well, where do you feel that in the body? Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm detached from that, right? So the dissociation part is sometimes getting clients to start there with, while you're, Hailey, while you're telling me this story, it feels heavy to me, right? And I do a lot where one, it's my grounding technique, but two, with somatic experiencing, a lot of like, I'm feeling this way. Is that what you're feeling, right? And trying to figure out if that's where I can meet the client, so we can do some of these deeper level components of EMDR to do the reprocessing, right? Of just even identifying, do you feel light or do you feel heavy when you're telling me about this, right? Where in your body do you feel that? Because even sometimes starting there is painful, right? Well, I don't want to be in my body, especially someone who has been violated, they've had sexual assault, they've had physical assault. They've been, they have early childhood trauma, they've been physically, emotionally, verbally, sexually abused. They're not feeling it in their body. It's not safe to be in the body, right? And so sometimes that's the work. So with EMDR, being in the body is terrifying because I'm not safe, right? That messaging, subconscious messaging of I'm not safe to be in my own body. So sometimes just slowly starting there of, okay, let's try and see if we can just tolerate being in our body a little bit. And what would that look like? Right? And so we kind of play that out in therapy of what would that look like? You don't have to do it right now. Let's just talk about this. So we can actually get to the EMDR pieces of, okay, let's be able to be in the body long enough, right, where I can withstand a high level of discomfort for a short period of time to get to that end result of reprocessing, right?
Hmm. So you highlighted a couple different techniques, and I would love to hear what else you're using. But you said like a lot of identifying how it's feeling in the body. You're giving the client some options of language because sometimes clients will be like, I feel bad. And I'm like, what kind of bad? Like, give me more. Bad is very vague. So giving them some language to describe their body sensations. It sounds like you're also helping them to like maybe physically with their own hand touch like their body and connect with it. Is there some other strategies and techniques that you use from the somatic perspective?
Yeah, so again, my eclectic mind, I like scaling questions, which is typically, more solution focused. 0 to 5, how great is it, or how bad is it? 0, not bad at all. 5, I need to go to the hospital, right? So a lot of times I'll use that technique of tell me, can you identify where in your body you feel it? And then if they say, well, I just feel bad. Okay, how bad do you feel? 0, not bad at all. 5, so bad that we need to end session right now and you need to go home and take a bath. How bad? They'll say, sometimes somebody will say, well, I feel like I'm a 10 out of 5. Okay, well now I might need to move into crisis mode, right? So now I'm assessing for a whole different host of things, right? But typically clients will say, well, I feel like I'm a 5 out of 5 bad right now. So then, okay, what would it take to get you to a 4? What would it take to get you to a 3? Because saying, okay, how can we go from 5 to 0? It's too hard, too fast. So what would it take to just bring that down a little bit, right? And then can we do that? So maybe we do some deep breathing, right? Okay, now re-rate it. Is it still a 5? No, maybe it's more like a 3.5. Okay, cool. Now tell me about where you're feeling that in your body. So that's that somatic experiencing of where in the body are you experiencing this discomfort that the language is, I don't have a word for it, it just feels bad. So sometimes I'll just stay there instead of looking for the clarification. Because you're right, bad doesn't necessarily, it's so vague, it doesn't help identify. So where in that? And so I teach this skill to clients all the time. So I have them use this as a skill when they're thinking about something like, I can't do this, right? It hurts too much. It's too scary. I have a stomach ache when I think about this, right? Okay, how bad is it? Right? 0 to 5. How bad is it? It is a 5. So the thought process, right, of that inner monologue is, what do I need to do to get it to a 4? Oh, yeah, okay. Breathing worked. Cool. Let's do some breathing, right? Okay, now where are we at? So I love that technique because that's something clients can do on their own, right? My stomach hurts because I'm stressed out. Okay, cool. Great job identifying it. How bad is it? And what do you need to do for yourself right now to lessen that? Not to get to a 0, right? Because then it's defeating, you know. So I'm using that technique with that somatic experiencing of where are you feeling it, and then sometimes we're moving into again that very quick kind of EMDR flash technique of okay, go with that, right? Let's do a little tapping, or maybe we're doing some bilateral component of okay, let's go with that and see if we can move that I feel bad piece to I don't feel bad anymore piece. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. You're helping them to identify how they're feeling and using like a gradient. So if it's a 5, then you're not having them be like, well, don't feel bad at all, but let's see if we can just lessen the intensity of it. And then teaching them the things that can be soothing, like deep breathing or any other forms of grounding or healthy lifestyle, whatever it may be, to kind of decrease that sensation.
Yeah, so we're using thought stopping in that moment. We're using, positive redirection in that moment. So there's a lot of, CBT, DBT type skills that come into play there.
Do you use any of Peter Levine's like tapping on the body? Could you maybe describe what that is for everyone?
Yeah, I smile. So Peter Levine has been around a long time. If people aren't familiar with him, I think one of his first books and still one of my very favorites is called Waking the Tiger. He talks about working with a young teenager who had a snowboarding accident, and it's just for me it was mind blowing when I was first studying somatic experiencing. So I smile when I think about him and also Dr. Vander Kolk with Body Keeps the Score. Those are the two gold standards when we talk about how the body holds trauma and somatic experiencing. So tapping is very similar to this idea of bilateral stimulation. And so what we're doing is we're asking the body and the brain to start to talk to each other in a different way because the body's going to experience something and the brain is going to identify that and say, no, danger, 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 danger. That is bad. We're not going to think about that. We're going to put it over here. And that's the way our brain, it's the way most human brains work. That's what keeps us safe, right? That's our defense mechanisms coming into play. We don't necessarily want to get rid of those. We want them to work a little bit more effectively. So when we have that tapping, what we're doing is we're using this multi-phased system with tapping where we're getting our brain and our body to start to communicate. We're calming down that limbic system that is now firing off in our brain. And so we're starting to calm that down. And so what happens is when we have a response, we fled with about 30 plus different stress hormones, adrenaline being one of them. That's that fight or freeze mechanism. And so we're literally tapping into that. And so when we have this kind of tapping, there's a bunch of different ways. People will do 2 fingers. There's different points that people can tap. So there's a lot of different techniques. If you're listening and you want to try it, you can find a whole bunch of free stuff on YouTube. There's a lot of really good stuff, and then try it. It'll either work or it won't work. Nothing bad will happen. You'll either go, oh, that worked for me, I feel better, or meh, I didn't notice any difference. So it's one that people can safely try without re-traumatizing, right? And so what happens is that it starts to calm the body down, calm the breath and the heart rate down, right? And bring the brain into awareness with what the body is experiencing. So the brain's becoming more attuned to the body being able to calm itself down. And so that becomes a little bit, it becomes more conscious. And so in a very quick explanation, when we do this tapping, what we're able to do is start to get the body and the brain to connect, right? And calm itself down. And it's the same reason it works with EMDR. It's starting that bilateral stimulation to basically reprocess without those extra levels, right? When we talk about 1 through 8, it's without that end piece of going through the reprocessing and doing the re-implementation of the positive, basically.
hmm And I also think of it as well for individuals who may be struggling with depersonalization, which is like not an ability to connect or identify with their own body. So, a very extreme example would be someone looking in the mirror and not really being able to recognize themselves. Like, there may be some on some levels being like, that's me, but not really that connection with the image of self and the sensation of their body. So, one technique that comes to mind from Peter Levine would be just someone tapping maybe on their hand and being like, this is my hand, this is my hand, this is my forearm, this is my elbow, this is my top part of my arm, this is my chest, right? And even though at the beginning it may be weird and we may feel disconnected to that idea that this is my parts of body, over time there can create that connection and association with your body and start to have that deeper association with oneself.
Yeah, it's getting exactly. It's getting someone who's saying, "I'm having this." I don't mean out of body woo woo kind of experience, but like you said, this disconnect of I don't feel what's going in my body, comfortable enough to be back in the body. And with trauma, the last place I want to be is in my body because that's terrifying and it's painful emotionally, it's painful physically for some people, right? So I'm going to keep being disconnected, right? So that's one way for people to start being able to sit in the body without having to experience the trauma or the emotional content, right? Like you said, that different tapping points. And the other thing that I really loved about, or that I love about Levine's work is the idea of progressive relaxation that comes in of being in the body, experiencing the body, and then progressively going through each body part. I usually start with the head down to the toes and start to relax, relax my head, my forehead, my eyes, my jaw, because we don't realize that we're holding our bodies so tight, right? So that progressive relaxation also deals with that depersonalization. It allows people to start to be in their body in a safe format. Because with trauma, it isn't always safe to be in the body.
Definitely. And so, what would you say to individuals who would maybe argue against EMDR? So, for example, one of the naysayers is that clinicians are guiding clients too intensely. Like it isn't really their client's own self healing, it's the clinician who is doing that, maybe too much guidance.
Yeah, I smile because I think that, with every theory, there are people that are like, that doesn't work, or that's dangerous, or that. And so my 2 cents on it is it works for some people and it doesn't work for other people. And so finding a clinician as the client, if I'm looking for somebody and I want to try EMDR, finding somebody who has the training and the knowledge that I feel safe with. Because I've been doing this a long time. I'm not bad at it, right? Like, but I'm not for every client. And so that rapport and relationship and trust is so fundamentally important for techniques to work. Because if the client is terrified about using EMDR and I take them through that process anyway, then that's not an incorrect statement with the naysayers, right? So I'm doing due diligence as a clinician to say, is this person a good candidate? Are they a good candidate for me as a clinician? What's good trauma informed therapy? Am I holding them in the space they need right now? And is this appropriate for them in that moment? And that extends to I really believe all theoretical orientations. And so with the naysayers, I wonder, I always wonder about that because there's pluses and minuses to all these different theories. We could talk about prolonged exposure for trauma, and there's pluses and minuses to it. It works for some, it doesn't work for others. I find as being certified in PE that to me is way more scary for clients than doing EMDR, but that's my opinion, right? So, I think it works. I think there's a lot of reasons why it works. I wish there was more empirically based information in research of why it works, but I think I want to remind our listeners that in the age of theories, it is a newer theory. This is not something that's been around 100 years, right? It's a newer theory. We don't have 40, 50, 60 years of research behind this yet. We will get there. And so I think some of it is being mindful, and then people that are listening that are interested in it, that have been doing this, I'm not sure if it's right, pros and cons, ask questions, interview potential therapists. We will tell you, we'll be honest with you. Ask questions. What's your training? What do you think about this? What's your treatment outcome level? I know you're going to get to talk to one of my very favorite people, Coral Compagnoni, who is just like an amazing clinical supervisor for EMDR and consultant. I think Coral, having lots of conversations with Coral, being very mindful of the skill of the clinician and what the client needs, and being very slow with the client, because my job isn't to convince the client, hey, EMDR is the best thing for you, it's the only thing that's going to work, right? So I think some of it is it's the responsibility of the clinician.
Definitely. And I think that's why it's so important. And that I think that's where some of these naysayers are born, is there's these occasions where maybe in applications of EMDR were not adequately used, or there was some occasional experiences where the client did not get the outcome they're looking for. And from there, some of the naysayers were born. And I do agree with you. Like, if you really think about it, I don't really know what therapies have been around and scientifically backed for 100 years. I can even name one for you. So all psychology-based theories are new in relative to the experience of humanity. And so I'm more of the things like, let's make sure the client understands EMDR. Let's make sure there's a good rapport. Let's make sure that we're doing our due diligence and ethical responsibilities around applying EMDR. And if that's going to give you the outcome that you're looking for, then wonderful, right? And I always tell clients, I'm like, I'm biased. I like EMDR. I personally tried EMDR. I think it's great. I can successfully go have a needle without panicking, which is wonderful. So like, there's different ways that we can use it. And so I always tell clients, like, I'm going to like it and I'm going to want to use it. So if that's okay with you, let's have informed consent around your options.
Exactly. And yeah, there's, when I first studied the technique, it was used for trauma. Since then, we've begun to use it for anxiety, panic, depression, not single episode trauma, but complex traumas. So even in I think Shapiro, I want to say 1987, but don't hold me to that. I think in the mid 80s, Shapiro was going through her own cancer process and started to work on this theory and develop this theory. And so when we think about that's actually not that old, right? And so she was originally looking at this from a very specific scope, and since then it's been applied and it works in a lot of different populations of people with a lot of different presenting issues, right? And so I think part of it is, am I a good candidate for it, is always the question I want clients to ask. Am I a good candidate for it? Because I may, as a trauma expert, say, I think so, but I think I want to do some other things first. Why don't we get another opinion? Let me send you to Coral. Let me send you to somebody great, because Coral's going to look at it from a totally different lens, right? Just like when I'm working with veterans, there's a very specific technique, cognitive processing therapy, or CPT. It is a very stringent model. It works extremely well. There's a formula to it. And so the same thing, I might look at that and say, okay, well, EMDR would work. I wonder if CPT would work better for what they're telling me in that moment. Not one is better than the other, but what's the presenting issue and what's going to actually work for this client? And then do I need to send them somewhere great, right? Because for me, that's my ethical obligation.
Definitely. And I always, whenever I hear you speak on your like different podcast episodes, it always comes across like your wonderful intentions of having the client have the best service possible and the best experience possible. Yeah. Well, it's been so wonderful talking to you today. I think it's just so wonderful to kind of talk more about EMDR, what it is, the pros, the cons, some kind of aspects of it, really highlighting that need for a client to go like, what is going to be the maybe the best approach for me and having those really informed discussions around it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.